So, welcome to the show, Angela. I'm so glad to have you. Thanks for joining me.
It's so great to be here, Jen. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, I mean, we have so many great things that we talked about beforehand that we want to discuss. You have quite a bit of experience and focus on areas of interest that I get a lot of questions on. But I want to hone in a little bit today on talking about DNA and your approach when you're working with your clients on how you use nutrigenomics to optimize their results.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the starting point for me because I think it removes the guesswork for people. So many times I'll have clients come to me and they'll say that, their husband or their partner or their friend did really well on a ketogenic diet and they're not getting results, or they've been trying different things and then they get so far, then they reach weight loss resistance. Or they just don't feel that they've got that kind of high energy and zest for life anymore. And I think that understanding their DNA just gives us like an idea as a baseline to start from, to understand, well, are there different SNPs, which are obviously segments of their genetics that maybe at baseline are not performing as well. And if we know that, then we can support them in the right way. We can also identify whether certain diet types would be right for them, so that we can get them onto the right nutritional plan that really suits their body and also gives them optimal results. So yeah, I do use it a lot as a starting point. Most people that come to me, they will start with my program that's all based around longevity and DNA.
So that those are the main issues that you hear from people: weight loss, energy, longevity, maybe sports for performance. What kind of people are you finding that are looking into this type of program?
Yeah, sports performance and also sleep as well is a big one.
Mm.
And stress. So it's a real range of people, actually. I think this concept of kind of biohacking, which is really trying to hack your biology for enhanced results, is becoming so much more common. So it's a complete range of people, from individuals who maybe have just tried a few things and they're not getting results and they're really kind of sick and tired of being sick and tired, right through to kind of CEOs and executives who are looking for the edge in human performance and really just want to like basically remove all the guesswork and get straight to the results. So I used to do a bit with athletes, less so now. I tend to work one-to-one on the sort of performance end in terms of human performance. And then I work on my programs. They tend to be mostly with women. That actually, funnily enough, wasn't originally by design. I just found that I seem to attract women more than into the programs that I run in groups, which are kind of more affordable, more accessible for people.
It's so powerful because I mean, the age I'm at, I was trained in nutrition and we were taught, I was taught the set point theory, and I was actually studying nutrition when we were taught that carbs are good and it was a low fat thing, right? And it never worked for me. I always struggled with my weight back then. I felt like I had to exercise a lot, low energy, didn't really feel good. And you're told the mainstream believes X, Y, and Z. And I think it's a more it's a newer belief that we actually are so empowered to make our choices work for us, and it's not like we're a slave to our genes. So dive into like, what is nutrigenomics and what exactly can you do from an epigenetic standpoint, or what do you do on a regular basis with people from an epigenetic standpoint to say, hey Jen, this is what works best for you, whereas Angela, this is what works best for you. And then it's like I have an aha moment because, oh, no wonder why that ketogenic or vegan diet didn't work for me. Like, that makes sense now because that doesn't suit my DNA.
Yeah, sure. So sometimes actually the best example, I guess, is using my own experience, because I have sort of really struggled. I don't think my parents were, they certainly didn't give to me. I've tested my sisters. They certainly didn't give me the best pick of the lot between them. So, I was diagnosed very early on in sort of my 20s with PCOS. It wasn't diagnosed when I was a teenager. I was kind of simply, unfortunately, just prescribed the birth control pill. But when I came to start thinking about having children, I realized I had PCOS and then subsequently endometriosis. And I was looking at it originally, I was still practicing as a lawyer. And really, really looking at, well, how can I solve this? And this was, my eldest is coming up to 14. So this was some time ago when there really wasn't this prevalence of information that we could find. It wasn't well known, but I managed to dig out a book that linked PCOS with insulin resistance. And I knew that I was being prescribed metformin, which I couldn't take. I didn't get on with at all. So I was really trying to sort of understand, well, how can I access this from a natural point of view? And then it was later, when I completely requalified in nutritional therapy and health coaching, that I started diving into genetics and looking at it and looking at the link and thinking, well, I can see that, we have a really strong family history of type 2 diabetes. It wasn't a surprise, but it felt like a surprise to be meeting those ends so young. So I got my PCOS completely under control. And then when I started testing my genetics, I could see that I did have a very high sensitivity to carbohydrates. So there it was in my DNA. But what's interesting is you might automatically think, well, then that's going to be perfect. For someone like myself, that would be perfect to go on a low carb diet. The danger then is that what people do is they'll think, well, actually a keto diet, it must be good for me. And that's where I would caution people, because I think that diet is it's very restrictive. So it is a form of elimination diet effectively. Unless you're including lots of greens and doing it in a healthy way, you can be missing out on a lot of fiber, a lot of B vitamins and things, but also you need to understand your sensitivity to saturated fats. And that was when I dived into my own genetics. I discovered that I was also sensitive to fats, to saturated fats, that I carry a copy of a gene known as APOE4, which is the one that's been linked to Alzheimer's. And so in someone like myself, you wouldn't really want to consume any more than about 20% of calories from saturated fats. So that's, taking myself as an example, I would be an individual that would be more suited to a Mediterranean style diet, full of, like avocados, walnuts, oily fish, olive oil. That style of diet is actually very suitable for someone like me, and would support my other needs as well. Because we were talking before we started recording about the MTHFR gene, for example. I do have a variant of that where it is operating at sort of 70%, and that affects my energy levels pretty dramatically. And again, that was something that once I had my children and I had just a background as a corporate lawyer, I really suffered with burnout, and understanding just that link and that I need more B vitamin support has been a really powerful thing, because it helps me maintain my energy levels, but it's also helping to protect my health long term. And these genes, interact with each other. So I think actually working with a practitioner to find out what your genetics are and then understand how they sort of interact with each other is really important. I think many people have done over the years 23andMe, and I think the difficulty with that is often it wasn't put in a usable format, so they weren't quite sure what they should do with it. But things have come a long way now, so you can test and find that the algorithms can actually recommend for you the most suitable diet. So it is very usable and easy now for people to understand.
Yeah, that's such great information. And I could see why so many women would relate to you, and why you have that Facebook female biohacker group, because I think we're women in particular, men are as well, but women in particular, we tend to be really hard on ourselves when we see something that's working for someone else and it's not working for us. And we're, instead of saying, okay, let's take a step back and figure out why, like, is there something genetic or something that there's a workaround, we tend to just kind of beat ourselves up. So, I mean, with the number of genetic things that you have going on and the success that you've had using this approach, I don't think there's anything more convincing that it actually works. And I think most of us that are interested in biohacking, we have had our own health struggles, or we've had close loved ones with a lot of health struggles, and we've had to search for answers that aren't necessarily mainstream. And because of that work, they are becoming mainstream, which is really neat. And that's why I love this approach. And I actually forgot I was diagnosed with PCOS when I was in my 20s as well. And I knew at the time that I didn't feel good when I had too many carbs. I was always on a roller coaster, and I am predisposed to getting diabetes as well. So, the keto, I went through everything you talked about, going ketogenic, which I actually feel very good on. I don't have the saturated fat gene, so I do okay with saturated fat. Um, but I do believe it needs to be cycled. So what are your thoughts on cycling diets, or is it really just a personalized approach depending on the person? Because I'm just huge on cycling. I think, women cycle, the moon cycles. I cycle skincare on people different times of the year, depending on if it's, summer or winter and what their skin needs. And if I want them to have more cell renewal versus more hydration. And I think there's something important about cycling diet and maybe supplements as well. So I wanted to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, it's just such an interesting area, isn't it? And I agree with you. I think cycling is really important, particularly when we look at, women that are still menstruating, so they're still ovulating. I think even changing the foods that they're eating around their menstrual cycle can be really helpful. It can help to reduce PMS. It can help to reduce bloating, can encourage, better progesterone, so production. And I think that that is a really important part. It's a part that I'm incorporating a lot more now into my programs with clients. I also think that with something like the ketogenic diet, you mentioned that you are probably a good candidate for that. I think that people need to, at least on an evening basis, kind of come out of ketosis and to maintain that level of metabolic flexibility and have some carbohydrates. And I think we generally sleep better if we are having some carbohydrates in the evening. Again, fasting is another good example. I don't think we should always be fasting for the same period. I think we need to be flexible, because we would have been quite flexible ancestrally, and there would have been different foods available in different seasons. And I think often I think historically what we've done in the last 60 years, we've interfered too much with the food that we're eating. So too much natural, isn't it?
We
But
think we're smarter than nature, and it never works.
we absolutely have. And I think that is obviously an issue. So interfering with the way that food and also the way we feed animals. However, we do need to not be too prescriptive as well, because life needs to be fun. So I think it's about getting that balance of eating whole nutrient dense food from animals and fish that have been raised in the right way and fed the right diets that are natural and in accordance with how they would have been, and then also feeding ourselves in that more ancestral way. But I think you make a good point there. There is obviously the Infradian cycle as a woman, then we have the moon cycles, and we have our seasons, and eating in season is also important. So I think that that's a very good point you raise. I think it's just helpful when you understand your genetics to understand the base sort of line macronutrient levels, not to be prescriptive, but to understand that, in my case, if I was to eat a very high fat, saturated fat diet, it probably wouldn't be a good idea. So even when I'm cycling in and out, whether I'm using my infradian rhythm or, seasonal foods, I would be careful of consuming that high volume of saturated fats. And I think that's helpful. So you can still cycle out, but you have guidelines that just help you understand the way that your body's working to really try and support it. And, I've seen this with some clients who have baseline, naturally higher levels of inflammation, genes like, IL-6, for example, or they have higher omega-3 needs. And some will need to have therapeutic doses of fish oil daily to really, look after their cellular health. And also, their skin looks better, it's much more nourishing. So I think it's important to take account of the genetics, but still have, as you say, that flexibility and this concept of cycling, and just ensure that you are preserving and maintaining that metabolic flexibility, which is really important. And then there's the aspect of looking at people's age. Our requirements are different. Even, both of us were diagnosed with PCOS, and so we understand that we are less carb we have got more carb sensitive. But then also let's remember that as we get into our 40s and 50s and beyond, and we may be a bit more sedentary, we actually don't need as many carbohydrates as we did when we were young, whether or not we have a higher sensitivity. And particularly, as you know, in the case of perimenopausal women, then baseline levels of cortisol are higher, baseline levels of inflammation tend to be higher. Glucose sensitivity, unless we're looking after our muscle mass, tends to be a bit impaired. So it's important that we take account of all these factors. And so, yes, I think, each there are seasons in life as much as anything else that we need to take account of.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about metabolic flexibility, and I think that's probably the hottest topic out right now, and how important it is that our body can kind of switch on a dime between burning glucose as fuel versus burning fat as fuel. And we've gotten so dependent on burning glucose as fuel that some of the symptoms people often experience are, getting really hangry, like where you can't think about anything besides getting food. If you're experiencing that, you're probably not as metabolically flexible as you want to be or you should want to be. And then also feeling like low blood sugar level. I know a lot of people will experience that as well, or feeling like you hit a wall when you're exercising. Like your body should be able to convert back and forth. So you mentioned cycling, but can we break down that cycling? And I know everything that you do is really focused on the individual and testing the individual, but just some broad recommendations for cycling with time restricted eating or intermittent fasting, or, break that down a little bit for people.
Sure. So, what I would say is that in terms of cycling on a daily basis, I think it's always important to have a 12-hour overnight fast. I think that's pretty good for pretty much everyone, unless you maybe are a type 1 diabetic and you've been given specific requirements. So, I would always encourage people to have a rest. Like, a lot of people have got into the habit where they're eating almost up to bedtime and they may not even realize it. They may not be eating physically a meal, but they may go and reach for a piece of dark chocolate, or they may go and have a drink that contains calories before bedtime. So they haven't kind of realized that, oh, actually, I'm consuming calories and my body isn't resting right up until the point I go to sleep, which we can talk about how that affects sleep if you'd like in a moment. But then when they wake up in the morning, unless they're consuming black coffee or water, then they probably, or black tea, then they probably, or green tea, they probably are then consuming calories again quite quickly. And we can easily fall into this trap where we are not fasting for very long at all. And the body needs that for a process known as autophagy, where it's renewing cellular components and recycling and repairing. But also we need to get into that fat burning state, as you were saying there, with metabolic flexibility. And the best way to do that is in the absence of insulin being raised and in the absence of carbohydrates. And if we look back to when we were kids, we actually do this really, really naturally. Children as young as 5, when they've stopped taking the milk, they will, maybe have dinner at 5 p.m., they'll go to bed, and they'll happily not eat for 14 hours until 7 p.m. But for adults who've lost that metabolic flexibility, that sort of feels scary at first, that they would go that long. So I think just reassuring yourself and working, extending that fasting interval slowly is important, but getting your body to retrain it that it is going to burn fat. It's fasting, we could have a whole podcast on, because it is, it's an interesting area. What we don't want to do is push cortisol up too high. So I'm not necessarily saying that certainly the female listeners that are under 50 should go and do really extended long fasts by any stretch. I think that can impact cortisol levels. And, depending on where you are in the middle of the month, towards the end of the month, it can be as well. Quite catabolic on the body. So it's kind of understanding that you need to work with your biology and your age and everything else. But as you rightly point out, a lot of people have lost the ability to burn fat. And so they're always burning glucose, which means that as soon as their blood sugar drops, they're now hungry and they just want to eat anything. And that's a really good sign that they have lost that metabolic flexibility. Protein is very satiating. So are healthy fats, as you know, and they're great for the skin.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's funny because people are hesitant to have fats because they think it's going to make their skin oily. And yeah, the seed fats, the processed seed fats in canola oil, soy oil, corn oil, all of those will make your skin oily and inflamed and congested with extra skin cells causing plugging and acne. But the healthy fats like avocado you mentioned are going to do the opposite. They're going to add hydration and actually balance fats and or oil in the skin and make the skin plump and healthy and glowing. So fats are good for your skin, and people often don't realize that there's different types of fats, and some fats can do harm and some fats can actually benefit you greatly.
Yeah, so it's really important, as you say, and they're important for antioxidants as well. So things like avocado, they're high in vitamin E. We need lots of antioxidants. And that, again, is another thing that I see when I look at people's genetics, is some people actually don't produce that many antioxidants. So we have ones we consume from our diet, and then we have ones that we make ourselves. So things like glutathione and superoxide dismutase and catalase. And some people are just not that efficient at producing them themselves. So they need support. And the best thing to do in that scenario is to eat an abundance of antioxidants in your diet. So that's really looking just at colorful, dark, vibrant foods. The color pigment often indicates the polyphenols and antioxidants. So it's really important that people get that aspect right as well. But to go back to the original question on metabolic flexibility, when you're eating more protein, it's quite satiating. It's particularly been shown in the literature that if you have a certain variant of something known as the FTO gene, which is the fat mass and obesity, so the one that's been linked with you being more vulnerable to weight gain, then actually you may get better effects in terms of feeling satiated with a higher protein diet. It's also a great way to trigger muscle protein synthesis, which is really important as we age, because we know that if we're not working out and we're not eating enough protein, then we lose somewhere between 3 and 8% of muscle mass per decade. So we want to be, and muscle's our friend. Muscle's what makes you give you those sexy curves, but it also really gives you that metabolic flexibility because it means that you are more insulin sensitive. It's an endocrine, muscle's an endocrine organ, as you know. And so supporting your muscle mass is one of the best things you can do as you get older. It means you're going to be able to have greater metabolic flexibility and more fun in your diet and more freedom to enjoy things if you're applying something like the 80-20 rule. And protein can help with that. It's its own independent trigger to exercise. But I think that the more people can include nutrient-dense food as well, the less cravings they're going to have, because there's been some studies that show we'll continue to eat and eat if we're nutrient deprived. So that's really important. And generally won't be eating good stuff either. We'll be snacking on salty or sugary foods that are actually not providing us with those nutrients, and then there becomes the vicious circle. Sleep is also really important for metabolic flexibility, so we can talk about that as well if you want to.
I do. I want to talk about sleep in a moment. I want to just ask you, so you mentioned protein and exercise. So if someone is intermittent fasting, and we'll just call it time restricted eating, right? Maybe 16 hours for a man and 12, 14 hours for a woman, and cycling with her cycle. During the refeed, when we start eating again in the morning, or the afternoon, the type of meal that is initiated is obviously very important. So, do you recommend a higher protein meal at that time to switch from catabolic to anabolic? And how do you integrate exercise at that time? Do you recommend some weight bearing, some weightlifting exercises, some, low cardio, low pace cardio? How do you integrate exercise into the intermittent fasting kind of protocol?
So if we're wanting to extend that fast a little bit longer, then I would always say to go with something very low intensity that is still like taking advantage of that fat burning. So like I have a WhatsApp group, if anyone can message if they want to join, that's just full of people that, it's called Shift AM, where we talk about our morning exercise and people will share photographs of what they do in the morning. And it's a great time to capitalize on that fat burning and get the body moving. It helps with posture as well. It gets the blood flowing, and you're not going to get ridiculously hungry. I think when people get out of bed in the morning and they decide to go and opt straight for a high intensity workout, a few things can happen. They can become excessively hungry all day. And then they're not managing their blood sugar because they just want to eat anything and everything. And they can also be raising cortisol, which is already quite high in the morning. So there's always this big debate. If cortisol's higher in the morning, should we just ride on that wave and take advantage and do something intense? Or should we actually moderate the effects and think, well, cortisol's quite high anyway, that's quite catabolic. I'll go with something that is more gentle and takes account of fat burning. And I tend to come out on that side. I do think that when you're going to break that fast, doing exercise that involves something that's weight bearing can be really helpful. That gives you the opportunity to then refuel with protein and carbohydrates. You don't have to wait until the end of the day. I would encourage people, if they've done something that's using resistance, then probably having some protein and some carbs can be really helpful in moderating the effects of cortisol and encourage that anabolic response as well, so that they're really getting the most out of their workouts. The other thing is, for some people though, they will feel that they're only going to do a really solid workout and put that intense effort in if they have had some carbohydrates before. So for some people, eating before is important. And I think that you really need to assess if you're feeling. I was having this conversation actually with Dr. Stacey Sims, who wrote the book Raw. She's got a TED Talk, Women Are Not Small Men. And, you know, she was talking about how even if she's going for like a sea swim or something in the morning, she will still have some caffeine with maybe half a banana and some collagen powder or something mixed up as a like little shot that powers her workout and gives her the energy, even though it isn't necessarily a really intense long session. And I think that that's the whole thing about biohacking, is it's about tracking, even with a simple journal, and starting to understand, how do I feel? Because if you're feeling really stressed, and as you said, you can't bring what you need to that workout, it's a good indicator really that you are not fueling your body in the right way. And then you need to look at why is that happening. I also think lifestyle is important. So, you know, at my stage of life, for example, I've got 3 young children. I'm super busy running my business with the kids. There's quite heavy demands on me. I like to exercise a lot. So probably doing really extended fasts, as we were saying, there's seasons in life, isn't the right time for me. That's not to say in another 10 years when I'm in my 50s and I'm postmenopausal, that wouldn't be a good time, you know, and then you're sort of more like a man because you're not menstruating anymore. You're not having those hormonal fluctuations, and the children are much older, you know, they may have left home. There's different seasons in life. And I would encourage people really to look at that and just not beat up on yourself, you know, be kind. That's also equally important, and be patient and be gentle and work with your body for whatever gives you the best results.
Yeah, there's some really good things to unpack there. So, checking in with yourself, what works for you, and it is going to be different with everyone. And I think when we look externally for, some sort of set pattern and some sort of set protocol, that's when we do ourselves wrong. So, these general guidelines of intermittently fasting, or fasting in certain times of the month, are going to be better than others. Obviously, the week before your period, you're going to want to have more carbs and be a little gentler with yourself than mid-cycle, when you can lift heavier weights and be a little bit more anabolic as well, and do more of a ketosis sort of thing. um, but what I find in a lot of people that I work with is that they do really well doing something slow paced, like having meetings on the phone and walking in the morning to extend their fast, and then having a small meal with more protein and fat and lower carbs, and then hitting weights and being anabolic. And now they're in an anabolic phase, and then having higher carbs later at night before bed. And I think that's because that can enhance sleep. So I wanted to touch on how you approach sleep, because that tends to be a problem, especially in those women that are perimenopausal, and even men as well in their 40s and 50s, for multiple reasons. Sleep is a really big issue. So how do you approach that from a nutrition or supplement standpoint?
Yeah, you're right. So it is a really big issue. And I think a lot of women struggle with their sleep, particularly if, for example, they're light sleepers as well. And again, this is an element of this is genetic, whether you're a light sleeper, how much sleep duration you need, and also whether you're a morning person or a night owl. So I think the first thing is, let's align ourselves with our circadian rhythm as much as we can. And again, that morning, what we were talking about, getting outside in the sunshine early, getting access to natural blue light, is a great way of setting your circadian clock. The other thing with fasting is, if you're eating earlier in the day, if that fasting window is earlier, it tends to support your circadian rhythm and you'll sleep better than fasting all morning and then trying to sort of front load or back load the end of the day. But again, play around with it and see what works for you. I do find that carbohydrates tend to help most people sleep better in the evening. I don't encourage like a really big portion, because I think then you can raise insulin. And what we want to make sure, and you'll know this from the skin point of view, is that, beauty sleep really does exist. And we want to encourage that release of growth hormone, not just for our skin, but for our health in general. And growth hormone tends to be released in the absence of insulin. So I think that having a small amount of carbohydrates with your evening meal, something like some white rice or sweet potato, but then leaving 3 hours before bedtime so that you're now going into more of a fasted state, that will help you. You're not digesting food. That will help you get into a deep sleep and release lots of lovely levels of growth hormone, which is important for our muscle mass, for our skin health. It's important for the health of our gut, which I think is renewed about every 10 days. So we need that as well. And it will help you look younger and feel younger. And in our 40s, for men and women, it's pretty much the only time we're really releasing good amounts of growth hormone, because we're not children, we're not growing all the time anymore. So I think that's important, and getting that circadian alignment and getting exposure to light at the right times of day is really key. So, the two main cues are light and food. Probably light is the bigger of those two.
So you probably recommend that for jet lag as well. I find that resetting your meal and not eating until you arrive somewhere, which we're not really having a problem with jet lag with the lack of traveling nowadays. But, when I used to travel, I just wouldn't eat. And then when I arrived, I'd get in sunlight, have a meal. Some people are big advocates of, running or getting some exercise is helpful as well. But if you can do it with jet lag, then it should be able to reset you on a regular basis at home and help encourage good sleep cycles. And shutting off the computers at night, we know, is a big issue. Are you a fan of red light?
I do like red light. Yeah, I do. So I mean, it's, there are 5 types of bioactive light in humans. So we've got UV light, which we have to be careful of, but we need for vitamin D synthesis. Then we have the blue light, which, as we were saying, is really important for circadian rhythm, particularly in the morning. But then we also have the red, near and far infrared from the sun. And the far infrared is the energy of heat. You can't see it, but it literally heats your body up from the inside out. And then the near and you've got the mid as well, but the near and the near, mid, and the red are all really important for mitochondrial health, which is like the energy powerhouses of our cells. So exposing ourselves to light is so important, and getting that bare skin out there, obviously not in peak times of the sun, but then we can also, from a biohacking perspective, we can simulate that in our homes. So I use red light therapy, and I also have an infrared sauna as well. So that kind of helps me get access to that, particularly here in the UK. Between November and the end of February, we don't have very much access to light.
Do you like using the red light in the morning or evening or both? I'm a morning user, so I ask.
I'm a morning user. I like to meditate in front of my red light. I think it's great for collagen, isn't it, for your
It
skin?
is. Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. So I find I like it in the morning. I think at a distance, it's quite nice in the evening. I haven't stood in front of it in the evening. I know that some people feel, because of the impact on mitochondrial health, they can feel quite energized if they use it before bedtime, whereas other people find it's fine. I think it's great as a light to have in the room. I'll sometimes have it on, particularly if I'm working late. I've got my blue blockers on and offset. I try not to work after 7, but on the odd occasion, if I have to, having that red light to offset some of that is useful as well. But I don't tend to stand or sit or lie in front of it at night.
Can we pivot and talk a little bit about supplements? Are there any supplements that you pretty much recommend for everyone, or is that not the approach you take?
I do. I think that pretty much everyone can benefit from omega-3 supplementation, as long as it's high quality.
That was the first that came to my mind as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think that with the other vitamins, B vitamin support is really key if you do have certain SNPs in terms of methylation. I also think, depending on your lifestyle, like, we can deplete B vitamins quite quickly. If you're on birth control, you'll be depleting it. I think that is important. But you can cycle on and off these things, like a multivitamin. I think it's this concept of cycling that you introduced there a little bit earlier in the episode is really important. I don't think you necessarily want to be taking the same supplement all of the time. And I think that, so with a multivitamin, for example, maybe you don't feel that you need it in summer. Vitamin D, you probably need some support, especially if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, somewhere like the UK in the winter. But if you are synthesized, and again, that's another, everything seems to come down to genetics, doesn't it? That's another genetic thing. Some people synthesize vitamin D from the sun more effectively than others. So if you're someone that doesn't, I would encourage you to get your vitamin D checked annually at least, so that you can actually then dose your vitamin D according to what your needs are. But I would say, generally speaking, on and off a good multi, depending on what's going on. Cycling on and off of that. But an omega-3 is really important. And then I do tend to take some antioxidants. I have a raised antioxidant need. So as much as I try and find them in my diet, I will also take an antioxidant supplement alongside that. And then I take vitamin C. I think that supports collagen production. You can correct me here if I'm wrong on that one.
You're 100% right. Yeah.
So I think that's really important, and it's, it's a really powerful antioxidant. I would say to people, just be careful with the antioxidants, that you're not taking them in and around exercise. What we don't want to do is blunt your natural response to exercise and the oxidative stress that's created. So just try and take any synthetic forms of antioxidants away from your exercise session itself.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So, when we exercise, basically, it's causing our body to we need that inflammation so that our body responds in the way that we want it to become stronger and better. So, when you're taking antioxidants around exercise, explain what that does.
Yeah, so when you've exercised, as you say, you have higher levels of inflammation, and particularly if you've been strength training, your body's going to break down the muscle. You've broken down the muscle tissue; it's going to regrow stronger. So the body's going through its own process there, but also you have caused a degree of oxidative stress, particularly from breathing a lot as well. And so the body will compensate for that by upregulating its own production of antioxidants like glutathione. So if you take exogenous antioxidants, so we have endogenous, which is produced by the body, and exogenous that are outside, there's some research that suggests that you may be then inhibiting your body's own response. So I would encourage people to, because of the research, just to stay away from it immediately post exercise, leave it a couple of hours, let your body do its thing, and then take the antioxidants later.
So let's go back to certain times a day that people should be taking supplements. So let's just say, and obviously this is going to vary. So I notice if I'm having more of a whole foods diet, I won't really supplement with antioxidants because I'm getting it from, we have really good farmers markets this time of year. We're opposite in Arizona, everywhere else. So I'll have some really fresh food. But if I'm more ketogenic, then I will definitely supplement with, flavonoids and polyphenols. So obviously people are going to cycle, which you already recommended, but just say someone is doing intermittent fasting. Like we have a man who's doing 16 hours of not eating, 8 hours of eating. And in the morning, like when do you recommend taking certain supplements? Because personally, I like vitamin D in the morning with a little magnesium because I feel like it's more of a hormone and it should be more of a morning thing. But what's your take on when people should take supplements? And also, are there any supplements they should not be taking together?
Yeah, so it's great questions. I would say, so magnesium, I like to dose twice a day if you can tolerate it on your gut health. I think it is, very individual again, how deficient you are. But I think it helps you sleep. And I think, the energy output magnesium requirements peak as well around midday. So I think having it morning and night can be really helpful. I think with vitamin D, the key thing is that you are taking it with some fat. So if you're in a fasted state, maybe you're having coffee with a bit of MCT oil or something, and then you have your vitamin D because it's a fat soluble vitamin. So you do need some presence of fat to absorb that effectively. With the other vitamins, I think like B vitamins can be quite uncomfortable sometimes on people's tummy if they're taking them in a fasted state. So you probably want to take them with food, but I would encourage you to not take them after about 2 or 3 p.m., particularly if they're a big dose, because then you can actually feel a bit too energized and it can inhibit sleep in some people. Omega-3, if you've got a really good quality one, it shouldn't repeat, but I would still have it with food because nobody wants fish fat. So I
Yeah.
still think
We've
that's better with food. But then other things like antioxidants, if it's a food state supplement, it doesn't really matter when you take it, right? It's I guess some of the more synthetic ones, but I tend to take most of them with food. Obviously, the tannins in tea and coffee can inhibit iron absorption, so you would never want to supplement with iron unless you were needing it, because you can get toxic quite quickly. But if you were using anything that contained iron and you want to absorb it, then keep it away from the caffeine, and having it with some vitamin C can just increase the uptake by the body. But those would be, I think, probably the main ones I would touch on. I like to take antioxidants before bed. I think the body's doing a big repair system, so I will often take antioxidants before I go to bed. If I've had a glass of wine, for example, I quite often take some activated charcoal just to help deal with that. But again, then be careful, because if you're on any medications, charcoal is just going to sweep up everything and take it out. So there's a few things, but not too many complications.
Yeah, those are great tips. Those are really, really useful tips. I agree on everything you say. And I do find the B vitamins to be energizing and also a little irritable to the stomach. So I tend to have like a lot of my vitamins when I have my first meal of the day around 11 or noon. And I do love vitamin D with magnesium, and I like magnesium twice a day as well. I think most of us were recommending it only at night at one point of time because, it helps you relax and rest, and we're sensitive to the stomach issues. But I like a company called Bioptimizers. You're probably familiar with them. Yeah. And I think we have like a 10% code in the show notes. And I find that doesn't cause GI distress, that a lot of the ones with citrate can cause. So I'll sometimes aim for glycinate at night, some magnesium glycinate at night, because I find that to be really relaxing. Or if I'm having a conversation or having to think hard, I'll do like the threonate. But for the most part, I use the Bioptimizers form, as I find it's really well tolerated for people. And
I'm
yeah,
curious, what have you found in terms of supplements that enhance the skin the most? While we're talking about supplements, I'm just very curious.
yeah. Well, I love fish oil. Fish oil is probably my go-to for sure. I love astaxanthin. So if I prefer someone eat wild Alaskan, sockeye salmon, which it's really rich in astaxanthin. If you have farm raised salmon, it's given dye pellets to form the pink color. So we're not getting the same color to our skin. But the astaxanthin, it's astaxanthin. It's really good for the eyes and for the skin. I love that. There's a product called Glycidin Skin, which has superoxide dismutase from a melon, from a special melon out of France. And I like that product as well. And then collagen with vitamin C is really a good go for me. There's a company called Douglas Laboratories Pure Encapsulations that makes a nice hydrolyzed grass-fed collagen that has some hyaluronic acid in it and some vitamin C is a nice formulation, and that's what I go to. So I like collagen and vitamin C together to support the collagen growth and renewal. And then I think antioxidants before bed is actually a brilliant idea. So I took note of that, and I'm going to start doing that as well. And what antioxidants do you like? What do you mean by antioxidants? Are you talking about polyphenols? Are you talking about what are you talking about when you say
Yeah, so I'm not taking like the headline antioxidants. Like I might take vitamin C before bed, not all the time, but I wouldn't take I don't take vitamin A or vitamin E specifically at bedtime. I would be looking more at the polyphenols. So, things like quercetin, some anti-inflammatory compounds like turmeric. I tend to take more of those. So I really like Bulletproof do Polyphenomenal. It's got some really good stuff, resveratrol in it. I might take that before bed, but I'll generally, talking about cycling, I'll change antioxidant supplements. So I'm getting a range, each time I'm taking for a month or two, I'll then switch it out and take something different.
yeah.
But I find that I've just noticed that I seem to wake up more energized and vibrant when I've taken an antioxidant before bed.
I love that. And I do love resveratrol. I do it in the morning with my NMN, and I may be adding some resveratrol at night. And to see I'll check in with you and let you know how it works out. So I love it. I think that's a great idea. And then also going back to what you said with the vitamin D, it's fat soluble. So it doesn't necessarily have to be taken every day. So, as Angela mentioned, if you take it with fats or, even your omega-3 fatty acid at that time, it's going to be stored in the body. Whereas vitamin B and vitamin C, they're going to need to be replenished more frequently. So even vitamin C, you may need to be taking 2 or 3 times a day for optimal results, depending on your lifestyle. And same with the Bs as well. So all of these are important to understand.
Great point, because they're water soluble, so they're not going to stay in your body for any real sort of length of time. So that's a very good point, and I think that's where people need to be careful as well with the fat soluble vitamins, that they don't take too many. I've seen people take a really high dose multi, and then they think, oh, I need Bs, but the high dose multi already has really loads of Bs, and then they take a really high dose B vitamin supplement as well, and you just need to be careful you're not doubling up on things too much as well. I think I always try to still encourage people. I know that our soil is depleted and nutrient deficient, but I always think supplements are supplementary. So yeah, you need to get your diet right first if you can.
Exactly. Yeah. I think a lot of people use them as a crutch. And I love supplements. I'm definitely a fan, and I think it's a good way to tweak or biohack our health. Are there any things that you find again and again, or patterns that you've seen, or things that you've caught when you work one-on-one with people where you're like, "Ooh, that's a big no-no," that you want to share with the audience? Like, don't do certain things with supplements, or people overdo it to the point where their liver is just exhausted from processing all these supplements? Or do you think they're pretty safe with focusing on what you said and then maybe rotating through some of the other more specialized ones like quercetin you mentioned? And I love it, especially when people have a lot of hives or itchy going on, because it reduces histamine. And we know this past year it's helped improve immunity and in the immune system and kind of help balance things. So I love that, but that's also one that I kind of rotate in and out. Same with curcumin. I tend to just rotate them all because I find it's supplements, it fills in gaps, and then you give your body a break to kind of breathe and process and rest, and maybe go through autophagy and mitophagy, and then you kind of hit it again and it's ready to absorb. What's your thoughts on that?
Completely agree with you. I absolutely agree with that approach. In terms of, I don't see people massively overdo supplements, apart from where I was saying they might double up. What I do see people commonly overdo is, particularly women in their 40s, they feel like their body shape is changing and they can't lose weight, or they're maybe just not as tight and neat and kind of muscular as they were before. And so they jump into increasing exercise extensively. So it's like, right, I used to go to the gym and do one class, maybe 4 or 5 times a week. Now I'm going every day and doing 2 classes. And then they say, well, why aren't I getting results? Why am I getting this belly fat? And, sometimes less is more, actually dialing things back and having recovery. I think that we need to be a bit more polarized in our approach as we transition through those years. So it's kind of like, if you're going to do it, let's hit it hard, or let's take it low and slow and gentle. I think this sort of middle zone where people are doing, it's not high intensity, it's called a high intensity class, but it isn't really high intensity, because high intensity is where you'll go, it was originally started for cyclists, where you go all out and you can't manage anymore for sort of 20-30 seconds and you recover, and you can only do that a certain number of times before your body's just going to say it's enough. The classes that we see are called high intensity. Really what they are is just vigorous exercise. And I think if you consistently do vigorous exercise, you're sort of in this gray zone where the body is, it's not stimulating enough to really produce meaningful results, but it's stimulating enough to raise cortisol, make you really hungry. And I think that cortisol effect raises your blood sugar, makes you more prone to put on belly fat, coupled with the decline in hormones. If we're really stressed, the adrenals are not really going to pick up that progesterone production properly. So I think it's about understanding, again, just you're not letting yourself off the hook. You're not, being a lightweight, but just understanding that maybe actually you don't need to keep layering on the exercise, because that's probably the most common thing I see. And then when women dial it back and they just accept and create more of this polarized approach, they see much better results.
I think that's a brilliant point. It happens again and again where, people will start to get results and then they do more. And then now all of a sudden they're in this high stress mode from, you know, overdoing it in a way that's not really smart, but it's exhausting at the same time. And that high cortisol interferes with all of the other hormones, which you can already be somewhat deficient in. Now it's blocking the access point to the receptors. And by dialing it back and having more of this cyclic approach that you talked about today through diet and through exercise, that's when you can really take charge and be smart over your body. Um, I love that. I think that's a great takeaway. And I know, a lot of what you do is personalized testing with people. Can you talk about some of the technology that people may have access to at home and some of the biomarker testing that you do?
Yeah. So obviously, as we talked about extensively, I do genetic testing in terms of testing, and then I'll come to what they can do at home. I think that actually will point you in the direction. Remember, your DNA is going to show you your baseline. So it's not going to show you what's happening today. What we're trying to do is influence your epigenetic expression. So it's all in the epigenetics. It's like your genes may load the gun, but it's your environment that pulls the trigger. So let's make that environment as positive as we can. But if you identify certain parts and you think, okay, actually, I look like I'm somebody that really does need support in the areas we've been talking about, then doing something like organic acid testing is a go-to that I use with clients. So you can start to understand where might they now be deficient in certain things. So are we can see that baseline methylation may be impaired. Is that really playing out for them in real life? Or are they getting enough B vitamins? Let's have a look and see. they have an increased antioxidant need, but are their glutathione levels good? Are they replenished? Let's have a look and see. So I find that really useful. It also is a good way of looking at their gut markers. Is there any inflammation that will flag up? And then you can do some gut testing if you need to. If people are symptomatic, I would always then look at gut health in terms of their microbiome and whether they have sufficient levels of healthy bacteria and whether there's anything untoward there that we need to think about, any leaky gut, any kind of food intolerances. Blood work, I think, is always still important. So, looking at your thyroid health, just monitoring it, making sure that, someone like myself is checking it, or your medical doctor, keeping a tap on things like iron levels. Ferritin stores affect energy dramatically. And I think often doctors send patients away and sort of say, well, it's not that low, you're not anemic, it's okay. But understand that actually, what is okay may not be optimal. So getting yourself into these optimal levels can really make a huge difference to your health and your long-term health, but also your energy and your productivity and your performance, which, in turn then benefits your relationships and your income.
Mm-hmm.
At home, I think there's a ton of stuff people can do. I think even simple journaling and understanding your body and becoming more mindful about the behaviors you do and how they impact your health are key. For sleep, I've been trialing the Whoop strap alongside the Aura ring. I 100% prefer Aura. I'm just going to say I have no affinity to either company. I really like the way that the Aura ring breaks down your sleep and your HRV. Your HRV is a great marker for how well you're coping with stress and your overall load. And so that's an independent metric. If you feel like, well, maybe I'm not pushing it that hard, maybe I'm just rushing out and I should be doing all these workouts and everything else that you're trying to put in as a type A personality. Maybe actually, if you look at your HRV, and that's the variation between your heartbeats. So just so people are clear, that your heart is not designed to beat like a metronome. So it's not, if it was 60 beats a minute, it wouldn't be 1 beat per second. There's intervals, and the greater those intervals in general, this isn't always the case, but in general, that's showing that we have good vascular health and we have good vagal nerve tone, and the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system are communicating well. However, the most important thing here is that, can you modulate it? Even if it is low, can you change it? So if you see your HRV going down, maybe you need to do some more rest and recovery, some more breath work. And if you can modulate it, that's a really good indicator that you've got better vagal tone. Because even people with really high HRV athletes, sometimes they can't modulate it at all. That's not so good. So don't just look at other people's scores, look at your baseline, get an idea, and then work out whether you can modulate it. So I love Aura for that reason. Whoop will give you your HRV. I think in your last sleep cycle, Aura will show you all night what it's been doing, gives you really subtle changes in body temperature. So it's been used a lot with monitoring things like, if people have COVID. I spoke to Matthew Walker, who wrote the book Why We Sleep, and his view is, it's a brilliant book, isn't it? Mm-hmm. His view, compared to what he does in the laboratory, is that he wears an Aura, is that Aura is about 60% accurate. I think it's probably gone up since then. This was about 18 months ago I spoke to him. So, it's still monitoring against you. So it's very, very useful data. And then I would say, getting a continuous blood glucose monitor. I think you have a company called Levels in the US that you can use. Yeah. Understanding that's a huge eye opener, because you'll see, isn't it? You'll see how
it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. If I have white rice, my blood sugar goes up to 270. If I have sushi, even with avocado and fish, that's why earlier when you mentioned white rice versus sweet potato, I'm fine with sweet potato. White rice does me in. And you may not need this testing if you're really in touch with your body, because you can feel a little loopy. Like I've always felt a little off or loopy if I had that kind of surge of glucose, but now the data's in, and I know that's not for me. So I think the testing is it's so vital. It's so vital, because like, hey, that does not align with me. Like, I'm not good with white rice, right? And that's not true for you necessarily, but once you have that continuous glucose monitor, it's really eye-opening.
Really eye-opening. I mean, I saw it with me. My husband and I were doing it together, and we had some celery juice, and my blood sugar just went through the roof. And people think, well, celery juice is really healthy. Yes, it is. But if it's skyrocketing your blood sugar, it's maybe not the best way to consume celery. But also the impact of cortisol, you'll see it if you're stressed, your blood sugar's all over the place, regardless of what you're eating. So again, it's another really good metric for that, for understanding the pressure you're on and where you need to spend your time. Do you need to dial things back? I think I rarely see clients who who are kind of quote unquote lazy. They tend to always want to be doing too much. So I think it's really good to have those independent metrics to just go, actually, maybe I need to take a step back.
Right. And I think it also helped me determine how metabolically flexible I was because if I went mountain biking or doing something vigorous when I was very carbohydrate dependent, my sugar, my glucose would go up really high while I was exercising. And as I got more efficient burning fat, I wasn't seeing it jump as much. So it's a really useful tool. So besides the Aura Ring or the continuous glucose monitor, do you have access to that in the UK?
To the continuous glucose, did you say?
Yeah. How hard is
Yeah,
it to get?
actually it's super easy. We don't have to use anything like levels. We don't need a prescription. You can just go on and order it in the UK. It's quite expensive. So like I think a monitor for 2 weeks is about 50 or 60 pounds. So it's not a cheap thing to do. But I
Mhm.
always say to women, if you buy two of those and look across the month to see how your menstrual cycle impacts your blood sugar, and you really like monitor that data, and you've made notes in your journal and you understand it, then just doing that annually will give you insights to make sure you're on track. So you don't necessarily have to continuously be wearing it
Well,
once
and
you.
socially, you don't want to. I had so many questions socially. Well, mostly because we don't wear sleeves so much in Arizona, right? So it sticks out like a sore thumb.
Have
And yeah, it starts a lot of conversations with what's that on your arm. And it's interesting, though. It's great to start those conversations with people.
Definitely, and it helps to inform them as much as anything else, doesn't it? I think the other thing, I guess, in terms of biohacking that I've been playing with recently is I've been taking like different types of mushrooms, and that's had a really profound impact on my sleep. So, mushroom tinctures, so things like reishi and chaga at night has really helped improve my deep sleep, and then I see really good results on REM sleep when I tincture lion's mane. So both of those, yeah, all three of
You do
those.
them at night.
I do. So lion's mane I'll take in the morning as well, because it's
Okay.
been shown, obviously, in rat studies at least, to improve nerve growth factor, and anything that helps my brain with Alzheimer's link is useful. But also, and curcumin is really good for that as well. It's been shown to kind of slough off that plaque that can build up. But at nighttime, I will put a tincture under my tongue of both chaga and reishi, and then I'll couple that with the Bioptimizer's magnesium and that pretty much, and my antioxidants, and that pretty much sets me up for a really good night's sleep.
That's nice. What brand do you use for the tinctures? Because I know sourcing is really huge.
Yes, so I can introduce you. Actually, I use World Kingdom extracts. So the founder there, Neil Tenier, they're super pure. He goes to great lengths. He plants trees every time someone buys a product. Yeah, so I really like those.
Okay, thank you for that. That's
And there's no
great.
hexane or anything. There's no chemical extraction.
Yeah, I know. I know. I mean, they're all not all created equal, so I just don't want people going on Amazon or to any place and getting this because they're not going to necessarily have the same effect. Okay,
Mm.
are there any other at-home resources or tech that you're familiar with? Like I've heard of one from a friend of mine who mentioned Vessel Health. Are you familiar with any of these, or they're not even accessible?
No,
Yeah. Okay.
what's that?
It's on the radar where you have at-home testing to see where you're at. I think the major limitation with a lot of these at-home testing or apps is what to do with the information, right? So without having, someone to help guide you with the information, obviously speaking with you over this past hour is such a huge amount of information that, just say somebody was at home and they tested themselves, they wouldn't really know where to go with all of that information, just like the 23andMe, right? You receive the reports like you are average weight versus you tend to be heavier, or you tolerate saturated fats versus you don't tend to tolerate saturated fats. Like it's a very different information getting it in a one sentence versus what you just translated for the listeners, where, oh, okay, this is it. So this is how you would follow your program. So I love the at home concept and the technology and the resources that I think that area is going to grow a lot, just like the Aura Ring has changed a lot of people, and the continuous glucose monitors have changed things. And then obviously this sort of information empowers people to take some sort of control of their health. But at the end of the day, where we're at now, I feel like somebody has to work with someone. So with that being said, do you work with people remotely?
Mm. Yeah, so I do, and it's a very good point that you make there. I do work with people remotely. And what I also do is, for example, with the DNA side of things, it's like, as you say, well, how do I integrate that information in a meaningful way? Because pretty much everybody wants to maintain a really healthy body composition, or if they're not there yet, get there. They want to have high energy for life and they want longevity. So how can they protect themselves and against chronic disease and use that information? So with the DNA, for example, I have a 90-day program that will take people all the way through what each of these elements means, and there's videos. So like we were talking about antioxidants, there's a video all about antioxidants, where to find them in your diet, what it means if you have SNPs, that genetic SNPs, that means you have enhanced needs, and where you might find those. Or if you are somebody who doesn't detoxify so well genetically, what does that mean for you, and where can you improve your nutrition to take account of that and compensate for those? So I think you're absolutely right. And I think that there's been an abundance of at-home testing with maybe not enough support. So what I've done is, on the genetic side, is put things for people in a meaningful way. And that also teaches you like how to sleep better, how to protect your brain health. And then now I'm actually rolling out more programs for people to look at other areas, so they can start to really understand what these are. And then I think people have got kind of tired of looking at programs and not having support. So anything that I do, even if it's on a program level, there'll be group coaching support where we'll come on live and they get access to me to ask questions, because I think, as you say, it's so important and people feel lost. And then without that support, it's kind of a waste of money because they don't really know what they're doing with it.
Right. And then, as you mentioned earlier, the needs are going to change over time. So, the recommendation today is not necessarily going to be the recommendation in a few months from now, and definitely not within a few years from now. So, ongoing support and guidance is really huge. And especially as we learn more and more, because this is such a growing field, which is why it's so exciting. So, if someone
Yeah.
has done, yeah, if someone's done 23andMe, is there like a way for them to integrate that into a platform where you
They
can see their SNPs?
they can, so they can convert it, but 23andMe tend not to test as many panels as we do. So we do like 31 million data points. So it's really extensive. And so you don't really need to do it again, and it comes with automatic updates. So sometimes, actually, particularly if you've done one a few years ago, it just makes sense to do another test. So you've got the really up-to-date panels that they're looking at. I'm also, if people are interested, we mentioned my free Facebook group, Female Biohacker. In there, we'll be sharing and launching within the next few weeks a private membership site that's actually just going to be there literally to support people on new biohacking technologies, on things that are coming out, on calls with me where they can come on and ask questions. So they can always come into the free group to keep themselves posted on when that launches.
That's great. Okay, so we'll have links to your website, your Instagram, your podcast, the High Performance Health Podcast, which I recommend everybody listen to. That's how I found Angela. There's tons of information on there. It's amazing. And also to your masterclass and your Facebook page as well. And then you did mention that you have a WhatsApp group, Shift AM.
I do, yeah.
Okay, so we'll link that as well.
That's a morning one. So if anyone's interested in joining that, then the best thing to do is just reach out to me on Instagram, Angela S. Foster, and just send me a DM in there.
Great. Thank you so much, Angela. I really enjoyed speaking with you today. And before we finish up, I ask everyone one question. How do you define radiance?
I think radiance is when you are in alignment with your true source, with your source energy. So I think that you literally glow from the inside out when you're in touch with your inner power. And if you feel off track, generally it's because you've lost that alignment. So if you can bring yourself back, you're going to glow, and people will just see that beauty within you will shine through.
Thank you so much. I love that.